So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first, and I'm so excited it's a woman power to start off our morning. She not only creates magic here in the U.S., but also in Spain. So again, all over the world, the people that you're going to meet today are already creating innovation throughout the world. You have the pleasure of taking extensive mental or hopefully physical notes. I can't wait to get my notebook out and learn from her and hear. She's a noted author and an international speaker with a book called The Social Innovation Imperative, and it was just released last January. Her speaking engagements include the Platform for Innovation in Vienna, Austria, Edison Awards, and the Universidad de Murcia. She's a CEO and founder of the Innovation Partners, and she's a dynamic innovation entrepreneur, marketing strategist, speaker, and author. She's mentored and coached and led thousands of initiatives, including over 100 innovation initiatives, helping her executive teams launch award-winning products, services, and programs. Her clients include, of course, Fortune 100 companies and mid-sized organizations in dozens of industries, from nonprofits to government agencies. She's also served as the Chief Marketing Officer for 2 entrepreneurial organizations, one of which she took public in March of 2000. And most recently, she turned her focus to social innovation, and that's one of the things we're all here for. She's applying the same successful innovation techniques to complex problems that our society struggles with. I don't need to list them for you, but let's just remind ourselves. Healthcare, education, natural resource management, homelessness, government innovation, and a myriad of other challenges that she is really bringing to the forefront. So without further ado, I would like to bring your first speaker for Franchise for Humanity 2014 here at Stanford University. Let's give a big round of applause to Sandy Bates.
I'm really excited and honored to be here, and can you guys hear me okay?
No.
We're back? Okay. In keeping with the theme of participatory design, I have actually put my whole talk on a mind map. How many of you guys mind map? Mind mapping is great, isn't it? I don't draw, so anybody that wants to draw is welcome to fill this in, and we'll post it for whoever wants to use it. I was really excited and honored to be asked to join you all. I'm actually based in North Carolina, so people keep asking if I'm from the Valley, and it's like, no, I'm from the other coast. And from there, I was previously in Austin, Texas, so we don't have stylists there. But it's good to be out of this neck of the woods, and I appreciate you having me. When May told me about this conference, and Jonathan actually was the one that introduced me, since he's going to be coming to the Edison Awards this year to speak with us, she told me that the topic was reaping abundance. And that really just hit home to me, because that is such an important topic and something to think about. And since you already have sort of started your Zen, I want you to close your eyes for a minute again. Thank you for that, Lita. It's great. I'm so relaxed. Close your eyes, though, and what do you visualize when you think about reaping abundance? What images come to your mind? Is it fields of wheat blowing in the breeze? Lush produce fields going for miles at a stretch? What does it look like? How many of you thought about the soil? All right, we have some gardeners in the room. I'm a gardener. For me, it was the soil, right? How do you reap abundance if you don't have anything to start with? And when you think about reaping abundance, it's not so much an end goal. We're not going to be able to have one great harvest and say we're done. Okay, it's a journey. It's something that's going to have to continue for years and for generations if we're going to have any impact at all. So when we think about reaping abundance, we have to pay attention to the cycle. We have to prepare the soil. We have to sow the right seeds. We have to nurture that crop. And only then can we harvest. But we have to do it in such a way that we do no harm. If we destroy the ecosystem that's producing the harvest, what good is a harvest? If we reap it once and can't reap it again because we've destroyed that ecosystem, what good is it? So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this. And that's really where social innovation comes into play, is that this is a process and a methodology that's really coming into its own these days, and is a way for us to facilitate this cycle. and to ensure that we still have these innovations happening on a regular basis, on a global basis, that we can continue to reap these solutions for years to come. So I want to start out with a story to talk about what social innovation is, because I think if we asked everyone in this room, we'd have at least a dozen different definitions of what social innovation is. So I want to tell you about a little boy. His name is actually Boyo. He's from South Sudan, and when my friend met this little boy, she's a missionary in Africa that runs a medical clinic. And this little boy was so malnourished that he had a hole in his face the size of a quarter. This little boy was on the verge of death when he came. And in traditional settings, what would typically have to happen with this little boy is he would be hooked up to IVs. His mother had to, I'm so sorry for taking my back. His mother and the siblings would have had to stay in the clinic with him for a great extended period of time. And this little boy would have had to use one of 5 hospital beds that service the whole region. So you can see the kind of impact, and of course that life is so precious that of course we want to treat that. But the cost of treating that was becoming so significant. And it's been about a decade now, there's an innovation called Plumpy'nut. How many of you guys have heard of Plumpy'nut? Okay, obviously not enough, but we'll get there. So Plumpy'nut is literally a packet about the size of a package of peanuts. It's a ready-to-eat therapeutic food that literally has the nutrients to bring these children from severe malnutrition to perfectly good health and weight. This little boy, Boyo, he was actually treated for 12 days with Plumpy'nut, nothing but Plumpy'nut, and was perfectly healthy after that. And this is happening over and over and over again. If you ever Google Plumpy'nut, Anderson Cooper did a great whole little program announcing Plumpy'nut, and he actually equated it to the penicillin of this generation and of this century for its ability to have such wide-ranging impact on saving lives and for very little money. And so I'm going to use this Plumpy'nut illustration because they did so many things right. And this is a social innovation the magnitude of which this world needed, and we haven't really seen enough of since. You know, we've got to get more Plumpy'nuts in the world, those types of impactful innovations. Now, the interesting thing about Plumpy'nut and why I like to use it as an example of what social innovation is because this was not created by a government agency. It was not created at a university. It was not created by an NGO or a nonprofit. It was created by one of those big bad corporations. Okay? This was a regular corporation called Nutriset, based in France, that made ready-to-eat products. And they turned their attention to this amazing social need, but they are still a for-profit company. And so the key to looking at what social innovation is it's not about who created innovations. It's not social enterprise. It's not social entrepreneurship, although those are great mechanisms for getting this type of change we're talking about. But a lot of the change that has to happen is going to come through corporations, regular corporations, for-profit corporations. Okay, so when we think about what social innovation is, Stanford Social Innovation Review, based here in Stanford, obviously, had a great article that when they first launched about 10 years ago that talked about what social innovation is and what it isn't. And they also clarified that while social enterprises and social entrepreneurship are very vital toward creating social change and social value, they were necessary but not sufficient. Okay? And that social innovation instead was a better vehicle for driving social change because it doesn't. Social innovation is about ideas and solutions that are going to create social value. Ideas and solutions that create social value. And it's the process that's important for us to get there, regardless of where and who is doing the innovation, creating the innovation. So when we think about what social innovation is, it's a process. The most important thing to realize, it is a process that generates ideas and solutions that will drive social change. And it is industry and sector agnostic, okay? Nobody owns that space. It's going to take all of these sectors to work together to make any significant impact, okay? So when we're talking about social innovation, we want to use that as our framework going forward today, is that innovation can take place anywhere, under any sector, with the smallest startup to the biggest corporation, okay? It's about creating ideas and solutions that will drive change. So what comes out of social innovation? the goal of social innovation is sustainable impact, okay? Sustainable impact. Now, I was going through this and it's like, gosh, I feel like I'm doing buzzword bingo here. Got all the major buzzwords going on here. But I want you to really think about what those two words are. We're going to talk about that. When you think about impact, impact has to be something that will address the needs of all the critical stakeholders in the scenario, okay? It's not enough. Impact will not happen if you meet the needs of one stakeholder at the expense of another, okay? Think about the Plumpy'nut example. If the children didn't like that, how successful do you think it was going to be? Not, right? If it was too complex for the parents to administer, how successful would that have been? If it required refrigeration, if it required fresh water in an area that doesn't have either one of those things, it would not have had any impact. If it was so bulky and the size of big boxes of cereal or something like that, that the NGOs and the distributors of the food aid had trouble storing it and transporting it, it would not have been successful. So when you think about what it takes to have impact, it takes meeting the needs of all of these critical stakeholders and identifying and understanding what the constraints are that could prohibit that innovation from catching hold. And those constraints are very real. And I do a lot of innovation, facilitation, and things like that, and people kind of wig out when you say that, you know, going to put barriers on your thinking. Those barriers are real. You know, the fact that these people don't have fresh water, that's real. You can't wish it away. You can't blue sky it away. It's real. And real innovations, the most creative people in the world overcome those things. They don't blue sky them, okay? You have to innovate within the constraints you're given sometimes. And those, the ones that don't move. And those are some very real environmental constraints and very real human constraints. So that's what it takes to have impact. We've got to meet the needs of all the stakeholders. When we think about what does it mean to be sustainable, that's where it gets trickier, okay? It's one thing to be able to meet the needs of these various stakeholders once or twice, but to have it self-perpetuate, have it self-renew, have it own itself, that takes a whole nother level. And that's where we often run into trouble. We have to have business models that will enable these things to happen. We actually have to think about the business models, which in the social innovation space, people don't really want to talk about that kind of stuff, but it's real. We have to know how we're going to pay for it. We have to know how it's going to fund itself going forward. It has to be owned. And it's not enough to take the solution and just kind of force it into the ecosystem. Sometimes we like to do that. We'll take this thing and we'll just kind of put it into that ecosystem and keep pushing at it until it sticks. And sometimes that can work. But for it to be sustainable, the ecosystem has to own it. They have to engage with it. They have to personalize it, okay? And we saw this with Plumpy'nut. One of the things Nutriset did that was just brilliant is they started having these manufacturing and distribution sites in the parts of the world where they were shipping this product. What a thought, right? Why don't we engage the farmers to plant what we need, the peanuts to make the solution, teach the women of the village how to create this, how to mix it, what the formula is. They even taught the women how to tell if a child was malnourished or not using just yarn, you know, so that they didn't have any dialogue issues or anything else. It's like you put the yarn around the arm, and if it's too saggy, the child needs more food. That kind of understanding the ecosystem and getting the ecosystem to participate is critical. Okay, so we can't just take the solutions and force them in there. We have got to get people to own them and to take responsibility for them. So that's how we get sustainable impact. Now, again, how do we get, you know, from here to there? How do we get there? And a lot of this is what we start looking at where it becomes more of the process part of the social innovation definition. And there's two big components of it. One of them is that it has to be systemic and it has to be systematic. All right, so when we talk about it being systemic, we mean that it has to include, again, all the critical stakeholders. It has to include all the different sectors. You're not going to have a solution like Plumpy'nut be successful if you ignore the governments of the countries that the aid is coming into. And you can't have it be successful if you are antagonizing the NGOs working in that area. It's got to be a systemic solution. It's got to touch and incorporate all the different needs of the stakeholders. But it also has to be systematic. We have to have a process that we're going through that takes into account what we've learned, how we identify these needs, passing that information on to the next innovation that's trying to take root, and learning from that. So it's got to be more of a process, a systematic process. Otherwise, we just get these flash in the pans. You know, we get an innovation here and an innovation there, and we hope that there's a lot of really good, you know, blank piece of paper thinkers out there that can create these things out of thin air. And a lot of times that can work, and we've seen it work, but it's not systematic. It's not going to give us that cycle of harvesting that we really need. So we've got to start implementing methods and infrastructure that's going to allow us to not only innovate, but learn from those innovations and pass that information along. And a lot of that's going to require a lot of cross-sector collaboration. Okay, and again, just cannot emphasize this enough. We're not going to solve a lot of these problems without incorporating governments, without incorporating nonprofits, with major corporations, startups. It's going to take everybody. Okay, you think about something as childhood obesity. Okay, the government cannot mandate enough things. We can't. What did New York do? You can't outlaw sugary drinks. You can't, think that type of approach is in and of itself is going to solve the problem. You can't only focus on the schools and say, well, they've got to have healthier food in the schools, because now you've got an education at home problem. Okay, so now you need to engage the parents. You see how all these things are connected. You can't just beat up on Coca-Cola for making these things. All of these different players have to get involved. They have to be part of the problem, but they're part of the problem. They have to become part of the solution. And we've got to keep that cross-sector bridge happening. And part of the way that we need to do that is to create this common language for this cross-sector collaboration. These sectors are not used to talking. I mean, I don't know, how many of you guys are in nonprofits? Government? Corporations? Okay, how many times have you worked with the other folks? Okay, how easy is it? It's easy?
No.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah, it's not.
Wow, you got some good information for us. It's not easy, okay? And some of the challenges that you face are just this, everyone's approaching the problem from a different angle. And they're speaking of it from a whole different mindset, from a whole different worldview, and from what they're trying to accomplish through their organization. And so we have to get them to start working together and having a common platform that they can work against. And this is the common language that I'm talking about. I have a paper on that at the Stanford Social Innovation Review's site. If you just Google cross-sector collaboration, common language or something, it's in there. You can find it. And that goes into more detail about how to get that language developed. But I want to kind of wrap things up because I want to have time for questions. In order to get this collaboration to happen, we have the last piece here, which is certainly not least, and that's the human element. And I want to start this part off by, right now we have a sort of a perfect storm demographically of our ability to execute on this. We have the baby boomer generation coming into what a lot of people call their purpose years, okay? They've made their mark in the world, and now they're looking for, what is my legacy? How do I contribute? How do I give back? So you've got this massive influx of people that are focused on that. You've also got the millennial generation, those born after, I think they say it's 1982-ish, somewhere in there. And there's a great study that Deloitte just launched on the millennial generation, and I really strongly recommend that you read that. This next group of leaders is all about purpose. And they are not only going into nonprofits and government, they're going into regular businesses and demanding that those businesses do something other than make a profit. In fact, in that study, they say that the millennials do believe that most of the social change that can happen and the social improvements that can happen will come from business, which is a very unusual thought for this generation. They're counting on business to do something about it. So we can't just leave it in the hands of government. We can't just leave it in the hands of nonprofits. There's a great book. I don't know if you guys have Whole Foods out here? Okay, oh good, okay. All right, John Mackey, he's the founder of Whole Foods, wrote a great book called Conscious Capitalism. Highly recommend that book too. In the book, he talks about the story of the caterpillar, okay? The caterpillar eats 100 times, or consumes, I should say, 100 times its own body mass every day. Does nothing else, contributes nothing else, just eats all day until nature triggers an event in that caterpillar turning it into a butterfly who now can go out there and do really good things for our world. And the point he was making in there is human beings and corporations and nonprofits and governments are like that caterpillar. But we don't have nature triggering our transformation. Or many of you could argue that nature is giving us a really big kick in the butt right now. It's like, all right, I've given you enough subtle warnings, wake up. So nature is kind of triggering a transformation. But a lot of that has to come from within, okay? We have to be the ones responsible for that for our own transformation. And a lot of us are experiencing that, obviously, or we wouldn't be here, right? And with that, comes trust. We have to be able to trust that others that we're working with, whether they're in this room or back at your office, are also have that deep embedded need to do something more, which is very human and it's part of all of us. Sometimes we just bury it a little deeper than others. But we have to be able to trust and reach out to that to get people to start working together. And then it's also about relationships. And over the next 2 days, we have that opportunity to start forging those relationships with people that you've probably never met before, that you don't know, but this is a great place to start making those connections. So I would just encourage you today to really focus on being, figuring out how do you trigger that transformation in your own world, and how do you connect with the people here to help make that happen. So I'll be happy to take any questions. We've got about 3 minutes, if you have any questions.
I have a question about scale.
Yeah.
So often what's happening in these discussions, which really fits exactly what I didn't talk about.
Oh, good.
but there's often a problem with disconnecting scale, right? Because it works at one scale.
Yes.
I mean, the reality scale of being, day to day.
Yes.
But then you have these meta levels, multiple levels. And as you scale, you're often confused into how to apply your concept.
Yes.
To these different levels, right?
Yep.
I mean, because the levels that we're talking about are so varied.
They are.
I'm sure you've thought about this, but do you have some insights that you can provide?
Yes, it's a great question. And the scale is so daunting, right? I mean, and that's what often stops a lot of organizations and a lot of people, frankly, from trying, because it's just so massive. I met with someone from the Stanford Social Innovation Review yesterday, and she had made some comment about, but that's such a big thing to try to, and it's like, but of course, but you have to start, right? You got to take that step. And a lot of it comes down to this process and having that infrastructure set up. And just like we were talking, the big data movement, a lot of the infrastructure that it would take to scale these things up is happening. We have it. And you think about what Nutriset was able to do in a very short period of time. They engaged, they didn't try to do it all themselves. They engaged others to do it with them. And so a lot of it comes down to this whole open source, the whole open innovation movement, where we can say, look, we've got this framework and this idea, go try to implement and feed us back what happens. Tell us what works, tell us what doesn't, let's move it. And that way we're all elevating to the next level, as opposed to anybody owning it. And, yeah, that's a great question. Did you have a question too?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the study you mentioned about the millennials.
Yes.
And, how does one access that? Or
Deloitte. Yes, it's Deloitte. I don't even remember who sent it to me, so I think it's pretty available. And the thing I love about it is it's like 15 slides and it's just diagrams and bullets, and you can read the whole thing in less than 10 minutes. It's a great study. If you have trouble finding it, I'll send it.
It's on the online portal.
Oh, it's on the online portal too. Okay, great. Okay, well, I need to stop because who's taking over next? Oh, okay. Oh, did you have one more question? Yes.
You were saying about scale. Do you think it's, whenever we're talking about social innovation, do you think that that's the right word? I mean, scale. Should it be something more about distribution? I mean, making these innovations, these concepts, these ideas being distributed more than replicated? I mean,
yes.
Maybe sometimes we're confused yet what we should do whenever we have a good idea, if we should scale or if we should scale meaning replicating or distributing.
It's a good point, and it's a good distinction. And in my book, I talk about it as diffusion, right? So I think that can cover both, because in some cases it is going to take a large infrastructure to scale it and get it out there. In other cases, it's more of an issue of diffusing it, getting it in as many hands as you possibly can so that it can take root and keep going. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. It's a good question. Okay, I'll turn this mic
Well,
off.
my goodness gracious, I think we need to give a very, very, very big round of applause to Sandra Bates. We're so thrilled. And how many of you feel like you're reaping some abundance because you were reaping abundance from what she shared? Let's give her a bigger hand than that.